I think what happened, Mr. Patel, is that suddenly you discovered that Donald Trump's name was all over these files, and you started a giant cover-up. So you are under oath, Mr. Patel. You just testified to Mr. Swalwell. And let's bring them up here into the room. These are women who came to the Hill and testified that they were groomed and raped at the age of 14 and 16 years old, and they called to meet with the president and to meet with the FBI and to have people investigate their claims. Some of them have never testified before. If you are so interested in getting the public to submit any information.
In Washington, inside a hearing room where every microphone felt less like equipment and more like a sworn witness, Kash Patel faced the one thing political performance cannot outrun: his own words. Before becoming FBI director, Patel spoke about the Jeffrey Epstein files like a man demanding a locked safe be cracked open in front of the country, naming the black book, demanding to know who the pedophiles are, and promising there would be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and no stone left unturned. Then came the July memo, the one that said investigators had uncovered more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence, but still decided no further disclosure was appropriate or warranted. That is the kind of reversal that does not land softly. It lands like a judge watching a prosecutor suddenly hide the exhibit he spent years demanding. So the first question is brutally simple. When did transparency become too dangerous for the man who built his case on transparency? It was a confrontation between a sitting FBI director, an attorney general named Pam Bondi, a former president named Donald Trump, and the unresolved shadow of Jeffrey Epstein, where every name carried institutional weight and every answer carried moral risk.
I can't speak for Attorney General Pam Bondi.
In a September 2023 interview with Glenn Beck, you said the black book is under the, quote, direct control of the director of the FBI. In December 2023, you said, let us know who the pedophiles are. Even for a short time after becoming FBI director, in February of 2025, you tweeted, quote, there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned. In June, you told Joe Rogan, quote, we've reviewed all the information, we're going to give you every single thing we have and can. But then suddenly in July, everything changed.
The woman from Washington did not begin with emotion alone. She began with a timeline. And that matters because timelines do not care about cable news branding, campaign slogans, or clever deflections. She laid out September 2023, December 2023, February 2025, June, and then July, showing how Patel's public language moved from absolute certainty to bureaucratic fog. And my view is this: when a powerful official promises the public sunlight, then takes the office with the switch in his hand and suddenly dims the room, the burden is not on the people to stop asking questions. The burden is on him to explain why the light went out. Now, the second question is where this hearing starts sounding less like oversight and more like cross-examination, because the problem was not that Kash Patel used different words in different interviews. Politicians and officials do that every day, usually with the grace of a man changing lanes without checking the mirror. The problem was that Patel's entire public case on Jeffrey Epstein had been built on moral certainty. The FBI had information, the public deserved answers, the black book mattered, the names mattered, and any system hiding those names was failing the country. That kind of language creates a standard, and once you create that standard in public, you do not get to quietly lower it when you inherit the office that controls the files. So when the woman from Washington lined up his own statements, she was not just embarrassing him, she was establishing motive, timeline, and contradiction. September 2023, Patel tells Glenn Beck that the Epstein Black Book is under the direct control of the FBI director. December 2023, he says, let us know who the pedophiles are, which is not a cautious sentence, not a technical sentence, not a sentence wrapped in legal footnotes.
You and Attorney General Pam Bondi released one video and said that there was nothing more to see. Your July memo says you uncovered more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence, but that you had decided no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. That is a quote.
February 2025, after becoming FBI director, he posts that there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and no stone left unturned, which means he was still selling the country the same promise even after stepping inside the institution. Then in June, he tells Joe Rogan, we've reviewed all the information. We're going to give you every single thing we have and can. And then July arrives like a locked filing cabinet being rolled back into the storage room. The July memo, according to the hearing, acknowledged more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence, but concluded that no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. That phrase deserves to be examined like a fingerprint on a document because it sounds responsible while revealing almost nothing. Appropriate according to what rule, what changed fact, what new risk, what legal barrier, what victim protection standard, what investigative necessity. Nobody serious is demanding that the FBI dump private victim information into the public square or expose sensitive material just to feed online rage. But when a man spends years saying the system is hiding the truth, then becomes the system and tells the country to accept less, he owes an explanation stronger than polished fog. And instead of a clean explanation, the hearing drifted into the old escape route. Blame the Obama administration, blame the Biden administration, ask where everyone was before, accuse critics of selective outrage, and turn the question sideways until the original point nearly disappears. That may work as political theater, but under oath, it is not an answer. It is a smoke machine with a federal badge on it. The question was not whether previous administrations failed Epstein's victims, because maybe they did, and maybe that failure deserves its own brutal hearing.
You are refusing to answer the question, so let me tell you that the Wall Street Journal reported that in May, Bondi told Trump that he was in the Epstein files, and at the same meeting said that the DOJ did not plan to release the files. Yesterday, you testified to Senator Kennedy that there was, quote, no credible information that Epstein trafficked girls to anyone else, and that you have, quote, continuously and publicly asked the public to come forward with more information, and we'll look into it.
The question was why Kash Patel, the man who promised there would be no cover-ups, now stood behind a memo saying the public would get no more. A serious witness answers that directly. A cornered witness makes the room argue about everything except the contradiction sitting in front of him. Then the exchange sharpened around Attorney General Pam Bondi and Donald Trump, and that is where the hearing stopped being abstract. The woman from Washington raised the Wall Street Journal report that Bondi allegedly told Trump in May that his name appeared in the Epstein files and that the Justice Department did not plan to release them. Patel was asked, to his knowledge, whether Bondi spoke to the president about what was in those files. He answered that he could not speak for Attorney General Pam Bondi, which may be technically safer, but it does not erase the hole in the middle of the question, because when the public hears no cover-ups in February, everything we have and can in June, and nothing more to see in July, they do not need a law degree to recognize that something changed. And here is the loop that should keep every viewer watching. What if the real scandal is not only what the files contain, but who gets treated as credible when the files become inconvenient? Because after all the talk about black books, names, data, videos, memos, prior administrations, and presidential knowledge, the hearing was about to move from documents to survivors. That is where the comfortable language breaks down. That is where appropriate or warranted no longer sounds like caution. It starts sounding like a gate closing in front of the very people the system claims it wants to hear. And once the question becomes whether the victims themselves are credible, this hearing stops being about paperwork and becomes a moral test. And that moral test began with one question that should have been easy to answer if the institution really meant what it said. The woman from Washington said these survivors came to the Hill, some after years of silence, and testified that they had been groomed and raped when they were 14 and 16 years old.
And let's bring them up here into the room. These are women who came to the Hill and testified that they were groomed and raped at the age of 14 and 16 years old, and they called to meet with the president and to meet with the FBI and to have people investigate their claims. Some of them have never testified before. If you are so interested in getting the public to submit any information.
She said they had asked to meet with the president, to meet with the FBI, and to have their claims investigated, not because they wanted to become props in a partisan fight, but because they wanted the most powerful law enforcement system in the country to stop treating their pain like a footnote. Then she asked Kash Patel whether he had met with them, and instead of a clean yes or no, the answer started drifting into the job description of the FBI director. That is where my view becomes very direct. When survivors are already standing at the door, come forward with more information starts sounding hollow if the people who came forward still cannot get a straight meeting, a straight answer, or a straight acknowledgement. Patel responded by saying his job was to inform by talking about manhunting child predators and sex traffickers and by pointing toward statistics and prior administrations. But the question was not whether the FBI has arrested predators in other cases, and it was not whether Obama, Biden, or anyone else deserves criticism for what happened before. The question was whether Kash Patel, the current FBI director, had sat down with women who said they were abused inside the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking network. That is not a complicated question. That is a yes or no question with a moral weight attached to it, and the more the answer avoided the center, the more the silence at the center started to speak. Then came the line that turned the exchange from tense to explosive. Are the victims of the Jeffrey Epstein horrific trafficking ring credible? Not can every detail be released tomorrow? Not should every sealed record be thrown onto the internet? Not can every allegation be proven in 5 minutes under committee lights? The question was whether the women themselves deserved to be treated as credible human beings by the FBI director, who kept saying he wanted more information. Patel answered by saying he was commenting on the evidence they had, that the FBI had routinely asked people to come forward, and that previous Justice Departments had already determined certain information was not credible. But that answer did not meet the moment, because the moment was not asking for a technical memo, it was asking for moral clarity. And this is the brutal contrast at the heart of the hearing. Powerful men get careful language, protected names, sealed files, legal standards, institutional caution, and phrases like appropriate or warranted. Survivors get asked for more proof, more patience, more credibility, more willingness to relive the worst years of their lives in rooms where the clock runs faster than the compassion. When the chairman and the witness argued over time, when seconds and procedure started swallowing the question, the hearing exposed something ugly and familiar. The system can always find time to protect process. It somehow struggles to find one clear sentence for victims. That is why this part matters more than the political fight around Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, or which administration failed first. Those questions matter, but they are not the deepest wound in the room. The deepest wound is that the survivors were being discussed inside a structure that still seemed more comfortable debating credibility than recognizing harm. When a woman says she was groomed and raped at 14 or 16, the first answer from the justice system should not sound like a locked drawer wrapped in courtroom vocabulary. The first answer should be that she deserves to be heard, her claim deserves to be investigated, and no name in any file should be too rich, too famous, too useful, or too politically connected to be examined. So, when Patel kept returning to evidence, prior administrations, and new information, the problem was not that evidence does not matter. Evidence absolutely matters. But evidence becomes a shield when it is used to avoid the human question sitting directly in front of the witness. If the FBI wants people to come forward, then it has to prove that coming forward does not mean walking into another wall. It has to prove that survivors are not only useful when they support a public narrative and not suddenly inconvenient when their testimony points toward protected rooms, protected names, and protected relationships. Because in this hearing, the question was no longer just whether Kash Patel would release files. It was whether the justice system still knows how to recognize the people buried inside them. And that is the lesson this hearing leaves behind. Public trust does not die in one dramatic explosion. It dies when people watch the same pattern repeat until the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. A public figure demands transparency when he is outside the room, then discovers caution when he controls the room. A government promises no cover-ups, then asks the public to accept a memo saying no further disclosure is appropriate or warranted. Survivors are told to come forward, then the ones who already came forward are met with process, delay, and language so careful it starts to sound cold. That is not just a communications problem, that is a credibility problem with institutional fingerprints all over it. My personal view is simple. The Epstein case is not the place for clever restraint unless that restraint is explained with absolute clarity. When a case involves alleged child sexual abuse, powerful names, sealed records, government-controlled evidence, and survivors who say they were groomed and raped as teenagers, the system does not get to hide behind phrases that sound clean but answer nothing. The FBI director does not have to release every sensitive detail recklessly because victims' privacy matters and real investigations matter. But Kash Patel does have to explain why his public standard changed, why the promised sunlight became a narrower beam, and why the women at the center of this case were not answered with the kind of moral clarity their suffering deserved. That is the minimum price of credibility. Because this is bigger than Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Donald Trump, or one committee room in Washington. This is about whether justice still has the courage to look upward, toward people with money, access, reputation, and political value. A justice system that moves aggressively against the powerless but becomes delicate around the powerful is not blind justice. It is selective vision wearing a blindfold for show. And when survivors here come forward from the same system that cannot plainly say they are credible enough to be heard, the message becomes poisonous. It tells victims that courage may get them attention, but not necessarily protection. So the final question is this: when officials say there will be no cover-ups, do they mean no cover-ups at all, or only no cover-ups until the trail reaches someone too powerful to embarrass? That is the question Kash Patel did not escape, and that is the question this hearing left sitting on the table. If this breakdown exposed something deeper than politics, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video, and subscribe for more sharp hearing analysis.